Hello, I'm John Doyle, the Artistic Director of Classic Stage Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Classic Conversations. For some time now, we've been presenting this series of informal chats between myself and artists that I've either had the good fortune to work with or artists that I wanted to meet. The conversation loosely follows the format of a British radio show called Desert Island Discs. It's my great pleasure to welcome this week's castaway, Nataki Garrett. Hi, Nataki, how are you?
I'm well, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, but I mean, you've had much more awfulness to deal with than I have sitting here in Connecticut. How's everybody over there?
You know, it's so I have two ways of answering that question. The first is there's a lot of destruction. You know, there's a tremendous amount of pain that's happening here. And I think the thing that's the most heartening, which is the other way I'll answer the question, is the way that people have jumped in to help one another. You know, people who lost everything are poised to help people who lost more. You know, I have actually not experienced this kind of community outpouring in any place that I've lived since I left Oakland.
Yeah.
So I'm really inspired, but also it's a lot. You know, a devastating fire in the middle of a pandemic. You know, in the middle of an uprising. Come on.
I know. Come on, God. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
I know. But there's been no damage to the site, has there? To the theater itself, or
No, and you know, OSF is fine. We didn't lose any buildings, but we have several staff members that lost everything, and so we're supporting them, and we're supporting other members of the community. You know, really disenfranchised members of the community who need support, and that's what, you know, we're focused on them. But we're, you know, the talent structure, you know, was within a couple of blocks of the fire, but we turned out that everything worked out okay. And if it had, you know, we would have rebuilt. You know,
yeah,
you can
absolutely.
rebuild buildings, you can't rebuld people. So
That's exactly right.
yeah.
So let me ask you, I mean, we don't really know each other, so this is a nice way to get to know each other, I think. You're the 20th of these classic conversations, and you're the first person that I've never met in person. So it's, you know, like when one asks questions of people that you know already, you kind of know the answer to the question that you're going to ask, but in your case, I don't. So that's lovely. I mean, how did it start for you? How did you become an artist? Where did it all begin?
Oh yeah, I love that question. So I think it's in my bones, right? My grandmother always made it a point to make sure that her children, you know, had the arts in their lives. You know, her mother did the same thing. My grandmother was known for calling you on Thursday and saying, Friday we have tickets to the dress rehearsal of the ballet. You know.
Uh-huh.
My mother was on a theater guild when I was a kid. My aunt was a prima ballerina at Oakland Ballet. My uncle was a violinist. You know, wow. I have all kinds of musicians in my family.
Right.
My grandmother would say that I became a theater director because I would boss my dolls, and she knew always that I was going to be a theater director.
Yeah, there's always bossiness in it somewhere, isn't there? Really?
Exactly.
Same with me. And then we try to learn not to be bossy, but
exactly.
it's still there at heart or in the soul, really. So really, I mean, I'm not going to say you didn't have a choice, but I mean, it was very much in the culture of the family, huh? I mean, the arts.
Yeah. If I had become a banker, I think my family would have been just as happy. In fact, you know, when I first started teaching at Cal-Arts, my mom was like, well, that's good because now you have something substantial, you know, while you're still working on that hobby of yours. But I was a dancer for a while, and then I wasn't, and then I got into theater and at 13, and that was it. And I've always been in the theater since then.
And did you know that it would be directing that you would do? I mean, did you know that's where you were going to go, or did you think you'd be a performer?
I thought I was going to be an actor, and then I thought I was going to be a stage manager, but no matter where I was and what I was doing, I remember being on stage once. I was playing Berenger and Rhinoceros, and I remember doing something and watching the other actor do something, and then I was like, well, what if I did it like this? And I was watching them do it, and I kept doing that until, you know, that moment where your consciousness is like really clear, where you go, oh, I'm I'm not acting right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm directing you.
Yeah.
And it was like immediate. And once I knew that, I really had a difficult time on stage. At the same time, I started to pursue directing more. When I was in college, I directed more and more and more, as well as stage managed. When I lived in Atlanta, I worked for, so I was in the apprentice directing program and the stage management internship program at the Alliance Theater. I was doing both at the same time.
Okay.
Um, and I remember like being really clear. I was in a rehearsal room with Kenny Leon, who was the artistic director of Alliance Theater at the time, and I remember just thinking all the ways in which I would redirect that moment. I kept missing my cue to get up and start move furniture around because I was the stage manager, you know,
Yeah,
wasn't the director or even the assistant in that
yeah.
moment. And I was like, this is for the birds. I don't want to, I actually want to do that. Like, that's what I really want to do. So I left Atlanta, I moved to New York, and I contacted Linda Chapman, had a meeting with her in which I told her I was introducing myself as a director in New York City. And,
Yeah.
you
And,
know,
and you know, when I started in the theatre, which was a long time before you did, of course, but female directors, my first job ever was as an actor. Only like you, uh, I mean, I enjoyed the rehearsal process, but I didn't enjoy the performing. The repetition bored me in performance. I wasn't my interest at all. And by the time I started working as an actor, I realized that I wanted to be a director. And the first director I ever worked with professionally was a woman.
mm,
And that, I mean, I'm talking, of course, in the 70s, right? In 74. And that was incredibly unusual. I mean, there were only 3, maybe 4 female directors in Great Britain at that time. Was there anything of that still for you when you started as a woman? There was. It was
yeah,
still
there
a
was.
challenge.
Well, and at that point, there were women directors. I worked with Andrea Fry. She directed Watermelon Rinds and The Ties That Bind at the Alliance Theater. I was her apprentice, and but there were fewer women. Kenny Leon actually made a point of hiring women, you know,
Yes.
and in fact, the person who took the job after he left the Alliance was a woman.
Yes.
But there were no women of color and like 0 Black women in these primary positions in directing or
No,
leadership. So
no.
when I was coming out into the world thinking, you know, I'm going to be a director, freelance director, I was really following men of color around, in particular, you know, Black men, George Wolfe and
Yeah.
Tim Bond and Kenny Leon and Kenny Richardson. You know,
Yeah.
I was following those people because that's how I knew I could stay in it.
Sure.
I have been the first in a lot of ways across my career. I actually didn't imagine that I would be the first in this. I figured there would be a whole generation, and then I would just be sort of moving towards something, you
I'm
know,
saying.
moving down a path. You know, I didn't know I was
Yeah.
laying a path.
Have
So
you
they were very,
enjoyed? Do you enjoy laying a path, or does that feel like an unnecessary burden?
I don't know, you take your mantle, right? You pick up your mantle. And so that's the mantle, you know, that I have Hannah Sharif at St. Louis Rep. This is our mantle.
Yeah.
You know, and we know the responsibility. When I was at the Denver Center,
Yeah.
and I started taking on the duties of the artistic director after um, what happened there,
Sure.
I remember thinking, you cannot mess this up, because even though you don't have the title, even though you're acting as the artistic director,
Mm-hmm.
you have to show up in this moment, or there will never be another one like you. You know,
Yes.
I remember being very clear in my own consciousness about that, which I imagine was the same consciousness of the women that you were working with in
Yes.
Great Britain in the 70s. Like, we have to do this, and we have to do it. We have to be the best at it, you
Yes.
know?
And
So
yes, and
that's the first.
certainly all of those, the 4 women that I'm thinking of, well, 3 in particular, they were all leaders of companies as well. They were all white, right?
Yes, yes,
And but they could only get the job if they could get to the point where they were leading a company. Nobody was employing them freelance.
yeah,
They, you know, but as women, they were seen. Okay, well, she'll be a good organizer. She'll be a good administrator. You know, those
yeah.
things that women do. So they were kind of put into that position. And indeed, you know, it was 19. I think it was 1990. I was working in Liverpool, and I co-produced a production of Antony and Cleopatra with a company called Taloa. And the director of that company was a woman, Yvonne Brewster, and she was the first Black female director that I knew in Great Britain. There
Wow.
were no other. And that was only 1990. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, like, that's just a madness. And
Well,
that production of, forgive me, that production of Antony and Cleopatra that we co-produced was
mhm.
the first all-Black Shakespeare in Great Britain.
Wow. I say wow because it's not surprising. It's just surprising,
I know. It's just surprising.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but then did you go into education for a while?
Yeah. So as often, many of us who are come from marginalized communities and are marginalized within this field,
Yes.
if you're going to make your point of entry, it will probably not be in the professional theater. That's something that I know that I'm hoping to shift,
Right.
and I know that there's a burgeoning generation that are primarily only working in the professional theater, but that wasn't what the world was for me.
No.
I went to grad school at Cal Arts
Uh-huh.
in Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
and upon graduation, I was out in Los Angeles for a while. I thought I was moving back to New York because that's where you're supposed to go, and that's what everybody said I had to do. But most of my opportunities came because I wasn't in New York, because I was in LA. Plus, at that time, Los Angeles is kind of like the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could take $5,000
Yeah.
and produce a play, pay everybody, and market it,
Yeah.
and make your money back, and borrow or rent a space. I mean, it was like you could really literally create spaces to do the work that you were trying to do. And so I stayed because I could do my own work. And then I was hired because I was not, a New York directing assistant, and I was one of the few that I knew that wasn't connected in that way. And I actually assisted Che Yu at some point.
Oh, really?
And Che Yu says to me, and he's kind of like, he does this all the time to me. He'll drop some knowledge in me, and I'll like years later I'll go, oh my God, thank you for that little bit of that changed the course of my life. And he said, it's not that you're a bad assistant. He said, but you have to really think about whether or not you're assistant or not, and then pursue whatever it is that you are, and don't pursue what you're not.
That's right.
And it was so profound and so moving, and I had no idea what he was talking about.
That's right.
But it moved me towards picking up a career in a landscape that didn't really reflect me.
Yeah.
I
mean, one sees that with I get a lot of friends who, young friends who are Broadway associate directors, right? Yeah. They're doing whatever's associate on some musical, and they get well paid, right? When the work's there, they get well paid. But I say to all of them, don't stay there for too long. You'll just become another kind of commodity. You won't become your own voice.
Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to say to you, to pick up on something you said there about Los Angeles too, about California. I've only done 2 pieces of work in LA. One was at LA Opera, and the other was at the Geffen. And when I was at the Geffen, everybody said to me, oh, I don't think you'll like LA. It's not really a theater town, etc., etc. But I got to know some local actors. And I thought, wait a minute, everybody tells me this isn't the theater town, but they're all talking about their companies and work they were making and doing. I thought, there's a lot going on here that I and maybe our profession is unaware of, bizarrely enough.
Yeah, I think that I think that LA is shrouded by the fact that it's an industry town, and the industry is film and television. But I also feel like there's a little, like, we're not New York kind of based shame. We're not New York, so we're not going to call ourselves a something. When actually there are hundreds of smaller theaters that really do promote. I mean, I cut my teeth in these 99-seat houses that supported me, in my early days in art and as an artist, emerged me in my career as an artist, allowed me to sort of push towards, take risks, and not have success or whatever those ideas are about success
Yes.
be at the center, but really art making was at
Yes.
the center of what we were doing. Joe Stein, Joe Stern was somebody who, took a risk with me when I did Neighbors by Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. And,
Yeah.
and he was, he was taking the risk. He wanted to do that work and I did too. And we did it. And,
Yeah.
whereas I know that the taper couldn't do it.
I know.
I know that it could not happen there.
I know. I know.
And when Brandon's work finally went to the taper, it caused a big ruckus in Los Angeles. Whereas we could sort of work in these nimble ways and maneuver ourselves through the landscape of making theater. The only problem was that it was deprofessionalized because because of its connection to film and television. The actors were making, not even minimum wage.
Yeah.
And it's everybody's favorite nations. You couldn't make a living as a director.
Yes.
In Los Angeles if you were a theater director, but you could make a life as a theater director.
Absolutely. So now here you are leading this when it's going, when it's functioning, this enormous company. How long now? How long have you been there?
I've been here for a year, officially, but I've been here for 18 months unofficially. Yeah.
And truly, and I mean, it's going to sound like bad taste what I'm about to say, but you really have had a baptism of fire. I mean, I mean, did you program your first season, or have you had a chance yet to program your own work?
Nope.
So you haven't even had that yet.
Mm-hmm. No, they have no idea who I am artistically.
Wow.
I said yes to the season that Bill graciously handed me, and it was, I mean, it's a solid season this season. That beautiful, amazing plays that reflect the humanity in the way that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, it's like it was a perfect road laid down, a path for me to travel. That COVID decided couldn't happen.
Sure.
So they don't know who I am as an artist. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time, and maybe that's better for me to really begin to unpack who I am artistically, because I have to be responsive and responsible for the life of the theater as well.
That's right.
And in a way that my first season may have been a little bit more risk prone. I'm not risk averse. I'm just I'm going to take my risks in the way that's going to be the best for the organization.
Absolutely.
Because what the COVID crisis did was it sort of clarified whether or not this is an organization we want to have here in 85 more years, since we've been here for 85 years, and what is it going to take to make sure that happens. So they don't know who I am artistically, not yet.
Yeah. And do you I mean, do you see a difference? What for you is the difference at somewhere like Oregon Shakespeare Festival in particular between being an artistic director and being a director? Do you see them as two different functions?
They are kind of like they are two different functions, but they come from the same thing. My practice is my practice. Who I am artistically is who I am artistically. And I tend to organize my spaces in the same way, though.
Yeah,
I like to move in spaces where, I pull together a table full of geniuses, and I what my job is to sort of make sure I'm the conduit for their genius, to make sure that we come together with something amazing, right? Mm-hmm. And I do that same thing. That's my same style as an artistic leader, that I kind of lead from the center, not from the front. I don't like people to execute exactly what I want them to do. I want to engage in collaborative spaces with people who have ideas and visions, and that's who I am. My work is only reflective of the artists that I surround myself with.
And that's really all it can be. I mean, when it's good, that's all it can be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, one's trying to be somebody else, and that's pointless. It's a pointless exercise. But when you say that they don't know yet the artist they don't know who you are as an artist yet, what are they going to find out?
I'm So my training is in derived theater, devised theater. I'm adventurous. I like, I like the unsolvable puzzle. I like the plays that cannot be produced. Uh, I directed the original play written by Katori Hall that is now the television show PV,
Yes.
P-Valley. I did that because I was like, this is impossible. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So as an artist, I'm so inspired and excited by like, how outlandish, what is the, if I unpack this and dissect it all the way down to its nuts and bolts, like what is it, and put it back together with glue and tape, like, what is that play? I like to engage with the playwright in conversations in the work itself. So I am a director that works my career is based in a large number of new plays, but for plays that are already here, I really do like to engage and play in the work and see what's in there. So I'm not a straight ahead director. I'm not always interested in the linear. But as a producer, I find myself excited more by surprise, the things that I don't know. As a director, I'm becoming more that kind of person. I directed a play by Issa Davis a few years back called Bull Rusher. And I remember being in the middle of tech and actually like where the play I was like, it landed on me. And I was so moved and surprised by what the play was actually unearthing, because on the surface it seemed like a pretty standard play, a story about a human and their process, right? But in its interior space, it was really about the evolution of the heart space, and it's something that you don't always get to witness on Black bodies. And so where their plight isn't the skin, their plight is like their plight of the day, can they get the right cantaloupe, or whatever that is.
I know. And so, I've never been to OSF, right? I must come out because your predecessor actually invited me to come and do a show, and I was unwell and I couldn't do it. So I've always thought it was a musical he wanted me to do. And but I've assumed, because I worked at Stratford, Ontario, which is a similar scale, right? Probably very different kind of work, but I'd assumed that a destination theatre, right? And perhaps you're not as much of a destination theatre as that is, but how does your aesthetic, you don't know yet, but how do you sense that your aesthetic is going to meet that destination theatre audience? And what's that going to do to them?
And we are a destination theater. We're 5 hours from Portland, 5 hours from the Bay Area. So you got to choose to get in your car or get on a plane and come here. Where is the intersection between my aesthetic? I am excited and inspired by the kind of the raw, kind of renegade, revolutionary spirit of Shakespeare. I like that he stole ideas and co-opted stories and used story as a way to ask questions about who we are as human beings. I like that he changed language and pushed the limits of what performance could be. I like that he talked about daughters and provided spaces for, reflectively for stories about women to be at the center of what he does. And so I think it's that spirit that I'm the most inspired by. Where I am sort of in line with what I inherit. Bill made a real point of making sure that this was a place for the development of new work. And part of the reason why he did that is because there are not very many theaters in the United States who are sourced in the way that we are. We have a high resource, and that means we have a responsibility to use that resource to create new work.
How many employees do you have?
When we're up and running. When we're up and running, we have almost 600 people. And that's artists, that's people who work in facilities, that's people who work in our shops, that's our craft artisans, it's everybody, about 600.
And do you have is it a company that, you know, are there a lot of actors who worked there many, many, many times, many years? Is there a big family of actors? Do you
There
like
are.
that? Do you like
I
that?
do. I actually do. And what's interesting here is that there's an unspoken kind of family of actors where the acting company calls themselves acting company. But when I spoke to Libby about that, Libby Apple is one of my two
Mm-hmm.
back, so it's
Back,
before
yeah.
Bill. And she said, you know, I never actually formalized, you know, this idea of company. I always had the ability to sort of make decisions about who was going to be on our stages, no matter what. What she gave the actors was this sort of ability to sort of call themselves something, you
Yes.
know, this acting company, and they could rely on their connection to the festival. I think so. So there are some things about it that's like that is really in the 20th century.
Yeah.
That model is really 20th century.
Yeah.
I think the future of company is going to be for me a little bit different because I am attracted to as an artist the ability to be promiscuous in my work,
Understand.
and I want to make sure that the artists that I engage with have that ability.
Yeah.
That there has to be an immense amount of flexibility, but that means you have to have the purpose of creating opportunities for your company members across a region. So I'm interested in connecting with my sister, and I'm working on that right now with my sister theater companies up and down the coast to open up the I-5 corridor and look for opportunities for people who find themselves predominantly working at OSF, but want to work in Seattle or want to work in
Absolutely.
San Francisco.
Absolutely.
And I want to create a way for them to be able to do that. So company is like home,
Yeah.
but
Understand.
you have the ability to sort of work across the spectrum. I also think that it evolves the artist
Yeah.
when you can work in other areas and other spaces.
Yeah, I was very attracted when I worked at Stratford. You know, I love the fact that that was their home. I mean, people owned properties there and they had family there and they could have a base there. And they didn't have an expectation of necessarily working there. You know, nobody
Yeah.
was foisted upon me. And as a director coming in, it wasn't, you've got to use this person, you've got to use this person. There was none of that whatsoever. But there was equally a wonderful sense of a powerful history, and that's a beautiful thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think it can't be a club. I think
No,
it has to be a
exactly,
home. You
exactly right.
know, I think that's different because a lot of people can be connected to a home. A
Uh-huh.
club is a private space that excludes people. I want a home.
That makes total sense, and that all are welcome to that home and can grow in that home. So, how are you getting on with the? You know, I've been saying to my board in a classic. I don't know if you know Classic Stage, but it's small, right? You know. Um, but has a long reputation, and I think has done great work. And I keep saying to the board at this time of the pandemic and everything else that's meeting us in this moment, you know, this model that we are working under is incredibly broken. Now, I'm a man who comes from a fundamentally socialist country where the arts are truly funded, right? You know, how are you finding that? How are you finding this model that you're having to negotiate?
It's difficult, you know, because it means that the artistic director's primary job is not art making. Our primary job is fundraising.
Yeah.
Luckily, what that becomes endemic to the landscape,
Yeah.
right? So people are used to funding theaters. Individual people, foundations are used to funding theaters where governments do not. And so I spent much of that, you know, I said I was here for 18 months. So that early period when Bill was still here, he spent a lot of time connecting me to a lot of
How great.
our foundational funders, the people who really love this organization and make sure that it exists. And I knew it. I knew that was a part of my job. It was a part of my job at the Denver Center. It was a part of my job at CalArts. So it's always been a part, you know, it's when you grow up here, that's normal. You have to
That's what
raise
you
money
do.
if you want to have a theater.
That's
When I
right.
had my little theater company, I raised money. If I
Sure.
wanted, that $5,000 came because I
Found it.
a fiscal receiver and I got people to give us some money and then we made a play, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm asking you lots of things. Do you want to ask me anything?
Oh, I do. So I'm very aware of the fact that the delineation between one century and another century really has to do when you can actually see the shifts, not when the year happens. And I'm so curious about as we move more and more into this 21st century theater, what are the threads you pull with you into the 21st century, and what are the things you sort of see being left behind, gratefully, left behind?
You know, well, look, I think one of the things that I'm grateful to see left behind is, when I started in the theatre in a different country, it was a very male-dominated, very white, totally white existence. I remember when I first employed a black actor in Liverpool in the 80s. People were shocked. I mean, hardly bears thinking about, So that, I'm glad that change, whilst still challenging,
Yeah,
and confusing in some ways, I'm glad that change is beginning to happen, more than beginning to happen. So I'm glad to see that level of whiteness gone. I'm glad to see, and this is again being British. I come from the Highlands of Scotland, and so I come from a very poor family who could never have afforded. I mean, if it hadn't been for the fact that in those days all your higher education was paid for by the government, 4 years of completely university paid or whatever, I would never be having this conversation with you now, right? And the world I went into in the theatre was very pompous and arrogant, I think. And now we use class in a different way, but very upper middle class, very, when I went to theatre school, we were told you can't sound Scottish. You have to sound British, right? So there was an arrogance in that. That's gone, right? Or is certainly well on its way toward going. That's wonderful. So I'm glad to see that go. In terms of moving forward, I've referenced it a few times here, but I did a lot of work in the UK in terms of diversity, and in terms of change and trying to make change happen when I was running theatres over there, being an artistic director over there. And of course, we stay for much, much shorter periods of time as artistic directors in Britain than tends to be the case in the US. And I was, I am pleased to look, I'm comfortable with looking back at the changes I saw happen, because I went to the University of Georgia myself in 1973, when really it wasn't all that long after desegregation, and I was horrified by some of the things that I saw, right? And I'm horrified of what I'm seeing today, but I was 20 years old and couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so having done that work in Britain, and then having come over here to work in a very different, in a much more capitalist, prize-giving kind of world, none of which makes me at all comfortable. And then starting to do some work here that, you probably know, when I did The Color Purple on Broadway, doing work that was only, 5 or 6 years ago, but as a white director doing that kind of work, I don't know what I feel about that now, but still going through a journey of what was happening, right? And of course, I'm now almost 68, so I'm starting to think, I don't know if I can keep up, right? There's huge change. I've always encouraged, I employed as directors, as young women, people like Phyllida Lloyd or Marianne Elliott were my associates or assistants in the early parts of their career. And I'm I don't know what one should say proud, but I am proud of that. I'm proud that actively, gave women opportunities and want to continue to do that, and want to, I would like to think that when I leave Classic Stage, somebody like you would take over, right? I would like to think that I've been part of opening doors to people.
Yeah.
But I wish, I desperately wish that governmentally, systemically, that the arts were more funded in this country than they are. That thank God for philanthropy, Nataki, thank God. But
Yes.
I'm not comfortable with the fact that in a lot of situations, to be able to sit at the table, you have to have disposable income. That makes me uncomfortable. It's not fair. It's not we the people. It's not all men are created equal. And it makes me uncomfortable. It doesn't make me happy. I think that is beginning to shift. I think everything that's happened actually in such a short time since George Floyd has really shifted some conversations that are happening that certainly were not when I took over CSC. Those conversations were not happening 4 years ago, and they are happening now, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I also have a very strong sense of people like me have to move over now. I'm completely comfortable with that, right? I'm totally comfortable. Doesn't mean that I don't want to be an artist. Don't get me wrong. Doesn't mean I don't want to make work. I thought that my days of being an artistic director were long ago over. And then I was asked to do this, and this space and the notion of taking classical work of doing classical work for people who may not maybe otherwise have had the opportunity to see that kind of work.
Yeah.
Really deeply excites me. I love beautiful words, and I come from a Celtic tradition of storytelling, and I love it. But I'm at the autumn of my life, my career, and I feel I'm excited by the new voices. I'm excited by the new generation. Sometimes maddened by it. Nothing wrong with that.
Yes, better be. You better be.
Yeah, sometimes maddened by it, but I feel I'm ready to hand a baton. And what I would love to do in these latter days of my career, my journey, is to pass on some of the skill, so that the skill doesn't get dropped. One thing of going from generation to generation is that we can pass skills to each other. We don't have to pass philosophies to each other, but we can pass skill. And I'd like that opportunity more. Did I answer your question?
You did. What I find interesting, because with my organization, we've made a formal decision that we're going to work with the We See a White American Theater document, and that's from the board all the way. Everybody's doing it, right? And in thinking about this idea that, like, what is equity really? This is a conversation that keeps coming up, a question that keeps rising in this conversation, which is, if the space has never been equitable, and what you're doing is you're trying to create a space in which people are competing at the same level, they're working at the same level, their point of entry is at the same level. Equity is also like the acknowledgement of the head start, and this, and equity is about making sure that a generation to come doesn't actually have to climb through the same hurdles. In order for me to be here, I have to have, I've worked as a second for several years. Most of my career has been in the second position. I also have an immense amount of educational debt, because as of course the evolution of our profession, the requirement was that, you could no longer show up. You actually had to have not just this training, but this training and this one, these 5 internships, this apprenticeship, and then, and knowing that this idea of what are these demands in this document? The demands are really about creating a landscape in which the artists can do their best work, where the theater spaces are there to sort of support that, and where the evolution of one's career is not one in which they keep moving the goalpost, and it's one in which you actually, this is what you have to get to, and this is where you're trying to get to, and we're all working together. I think you and I are on the same page in you know, I would like somebody like me as well to take over after I leave.
That's right.
And what I mean by that is a seminal artist with a singular vision
That's
and
right.
understanding about, you know, that OSF is going to become a container for future generations.
Yeah.
And what I want, how I want to source that is to make sure as many voices are at the table as possible in order to bring that forward.
Absolutely. It still shocks me that there are so many areas where there aren't, where people aren't able to come to the theatre, come to the table, even in the theatre, where
especially in the theater.
Especially in the theatre, where you think we're liberal and open and free, and actually it's not true.
No, it's actually the antithesis of that, and it's and learning that, coming into that consciousness as an artist has been both enlightening but also disheartening.
Yes.
You know, that I thought this was a space in which there was a kind of, you know, everybody could come, and you know, what you find is that the hierarchies are reflected, especially in cultural institutions, because we're the ones that hold the constructs of predominance and power. Yeah. And if the only way to shift it is to make a decision that you're not going to have that, you know, that you're going to be something else, and to take as many tools on as possible so that that's not possible.
Yeah,
I still believe that there are several members of the, you know, the group that hired me was my board, and there are several members of the board who still believe that this is an experiment, you know, that somehow they're going to test it out, if it works. And I'm like, well, you know, and they're surprised, you know, like, you raised how much money and how did you do that? And you reorganized what, you know, and you know how to do this? Yeah. Yes, I've been my whole life, you know, I'm almost years old. I've been in this career for a while.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. I've actually, you know, I've made it work for the people who I supported, and now I make it work for me. But it's the same skill set. I'm not, you know,
absolutely.
She's become such a fundraising, and I was like, didn't become that. I've been that. I came here like that. You know.
That's right.
You know,
your grandmother gave you that.
Right, exactly. She said I was going to be in charge, and so
and she was completely right. Listen, it's so lovely to talk to you. I feel we could talk all afternoon, but it's just a joy, and I hope that when all of this is over, we can get together and talk in person. But I hope people have enjoyed us, you know, watching us talking and watching. I hope picking up on the fact that here we are, totally different people from totally different cultural backgrounds, with the same struggles, trying to do the same job, trying to make change, getting it wrong sometimes. That's okay, you know, taking one step at a time. It's good. And you know what? We are at different places, but you know, you asked me earlier on about how it's moved and changed. The one thing I do feel, thank God, is I still feel excited by it. I still feel excited about a rehearsal room. And there's a gift in that, isn't there?
There is such a gift in it. Yes, I agree. I concur with that.
Yeah. Good luck with absolutely everything, right? The whole thing.
Thank you. And I look forward to inviting you out and you to hang out with us. So
I would love that so much.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I do hope you enjoyed that just as much as I did. Our future at Classic Stage is dependent on generosity. So many people have recently donated or sent words of encouragement. If you can help us in any way, please visit our website, classicstage.org. On behalf of everybody at CSC, stay safe.